Hey folks, Steve here with another Korea Fire and Ice video. We are in our first winter turn this video, excuse me, as we look at November 1950. And what's interesting is that this turn is a turn that is comprised of 4 weeks. So this November 1950, it is just the one weekly turn. So we get the monthly turn, we get one weekly turn, and we go right back into a monthly turn for December, where then it expands back a little bit to where we get two turns per month. You can kind of see up here. We get that for a few months, then we get kicked back down to one turn, and then it expands back out again. And what's interesting is that the net effect of that, in terms of like the game and what happens, is that you get a lot more. Um, well, I don't know if it really affects the game so much as like as you would imagine, right? You're saying less activity is going to happen in a given time frame, but it also means that you have less activity for that whole month between the monthly turns. So when you like refresh your supply up to your infrastructure level, for this turn, the UN, if they really wanted to, even if winter is harder to work in, could spend out all of its supply if it really wanted to. But the supply costs, I believe, are actually going to be tougher. And so I'll have to verify looking at some of the rules, but I believe that when we are in winter turns, there is a decent uh, penalty to the UN forces, and in fact, it reduces their movement capability, their activation ranges, and I think supply costs are increased for like refreshing HQs and everything. So while we can enjoy supremacy on the battlefield for the moment as the UN, we are going to see some things get a little bit more difficult in terms of operation. And in fact, while we wanted to keep some of our HQs in South Korea across the border where infrastructure supply expenditure is cheaper, we will probably have to come over the border with those HQs anyway, just to be in range of some of our units as we try to pick a better spot to defend in. Like I said, I think I said this last video anyway. I'm pretty sure we probably just want to defend over here as the UN, and because there's really right now um, no point in pushing too far north, honestly. And I was trying to figure out, I'm like, well, is there actually any reason to push all the way up to the very edge of the map, right? Like, what happens? And I'm sorry for the glare, I have to adjust this a little bit. Like, let's say we got up to these hexes right here. There's a supply hex, here's a supply hex for the communists. Now, there's a total of, what, one, two, three, four, five. There's five of these, and one of them is way up in the top right part of the map. I'm not going to pan the camera, it's up there. Um, so we were really trying to go for it, right? And we tried to get up there um, before the Chinese entered. What would be the advantage here, right? You could sit in these hexes, but what would happen is that you would get a bunch of these Chinese reinforcements. They would all stack here in the actual supply source hex, and then they actually could attack here. They could all attack there, or they could try, I guess, try to move around. You know, try to figure out some way to come across the border. So it's like it's not like a freebie thing. It's not like you can just come up here and then keep reinforcements from happening. They would have some way to get down here. Um, and even if they were required to go from here to here, from here to here, and they couldn't navigate the gray hexes, I have to double check that. They can still make a combined attack with, let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's like five communist units in this hex. Well, you could have five communist units um, try to attack out of here. I'm trying to think through the way that's supposed to work. The order of operations is probably what's important there. If you activate a bunch of units they become spent and then you use them, but then that means that they can't stack together. But you have to like allow, you have to be in the right stacking at the end of your activation phase. So I think it would be like they could all activate. Maybe they'd all have to attack. If you have 5 units, that would be um, plus 10. If it's a deliberate attack, then it's a plus 20. And even if you piled in all the support that the allies could have, you have a pretty good chance as the communists of just knocking the UN forces out of the hex, and then you could add, you could advance after combat something. But there was a bunch of problems with just kind of how all of that works, and maybe this is something I should just try with dummy counters and work through the rules and be like, well, what happens if you get up here? Like, what can you do as the communist? Is that singular deliberate attack with all your guys stacked together, is that enough to open this up so that you can get, stacking capability and move into North Korea from China? And I think that, so it's like there's no auto victory for the UN player if you get all the way up here, but maybe if you had occupied these hexes adjacent to the supply sources, and those communist units don't have really anywhere to go, maybe you've plugged it all up, right? And it's sort of like a no-win scenario for the communists because they can't get anywhere, and then what? It's like I'm not sure what happens after that. I guess if you're the UN player, you hope that you have enough victory points that you hope you have enough victory points to be ahead in victory points when you get up here, because if you get all the way up here and you removed all the other units, you can't get objective markers anymore, and the only other way you're going to get victory points is via combat and MiG-alley type stuff, and even that's kind of limited in terms of what victory points you're going to get. So it's like, what's the true incentive for me coming up here? If it truly is I get to clog up the communists and they can't do anything, then it's sort of worthwhile. But it's such a hard thing to try to get all the way up there, that I just don't know, at least for this game that I'm playing right now and what the situation is. I'm not sure it's worthwhile trying to do that. Because what it would really require is, again, we'd have to come up through here, we'd have to knock these units out, and then let's see how many movement points this is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if we didn't have any Zocs or whatever, we'd have bonus movement and we could get up here. So we, in theory, we could try to do that in a couple of these places. We could clog that one up, but then the communists just go here or here. And either way, they would probably be able to get units back over here or back over here, because I'm going to have a harder time getting all the way up there in the upper far north of the country by the time Chinese intervention happens. So it's like even if I was racing up the coast with nothing in my way, I'm not sure I could get there in time. So yeah, and I should say that I have done a lot of the monthly turn for November 1950 off camera before starting this video. The Chinese have not intervened, so we're going to have at least a couple more turns before they automatically intervene. So there's going to be a late Chinese intervention. They're either going to come in December or they're going to come in automatically in January. So for a UN player, then that question would be, can I, in 3 activations, can I clog all the communist supply sources? If I had not delayed and I pushed really hard coming over the border, maybe it would be more feasible to try to do that. But I suspect that right now we would have a problem with that, especially now that I'm looking at the map a little more closely. Obviously, this mountainous region becomes a big problem. And the reason why it becomes a big problem is that the roads actually don't all connect up here. So there's a Chinese supply source. There's a road that leads over here, but it stops and it does not link up with this road network. So you'd have to travel, if that's hill, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that'd be as far as you can probably go, and then another 4 movement points to get onto here, and then the rail line. So, and then if we were looking from over here, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, a huge amount of terrain to get from this road network to this road network, to clog that up. So just the way that the map is constructed, and the fact that you're really talking about the mountains in that region, and the roads don't all connect well, it's pretty much impossible for the UN to get up to this hex within three activation. It's just not going to happen. We'd be caught up here in the chosen reservoir area, and the Chinese would get to have their field day, right? So just looking at where my units are positioned now, I probably can't make it all the way up there. So I should think instead about what setup should I have just to defend down here where we'll have support superiority. I think that's what we want to try to do, honestly. I think that makes sense. And even considering objectives, right? From Pyongyang north, there are no North Korean cities. They're all towns. So any objective marker that we would look to place north of Pyongyang would have to be right now with a communist unit in it being a town. And so we're sort of spent out on, the objective markers that we would ordinarily place up here. There's not as many places to put them. It's harder to put them, but we're still doing our gamey little thing of banking points in the one hex of Seoul we never took. So it kind of doesn't. It's not that big a deal. I don't know. I don't know how you want to look at that. I suspect that 21 victory point victories in this game are hard to achieve. I suspect that most games would probably go the distance, unless the North Korean player got really fortunate and they captured all the port cities in the south. I could see that happening just with the way the game could play. I could see that occurring. That's feasible. That could potentially happen, maybe, depending on how the die rolls go and everything else. But I think assuming the UN player survives that initial phase of the game, it will go to the end. I think it's really hard. It feels really hard to probably get up to 21 victory points, at least with the way the objective markers are set up now, and how many turns you have, because it's really the number of turns that governs how many victory points you can even pick up with your objective marker. So there's sort of a ceiling for that. But obviously by the end of the game, you just want to be ahead in victory points. So having a nice, comfortable lead of like 10 victory points in the end phases of the game is probably where you want to be, and then you're likely in good shape. So anyway, that's some mid-game analysis for you. Like I said, I've already done a lot of the monthly turn stuff for November 1950. So we did all the reinforcements. There really was not much for the communist player. And we are basically up to the air commitment phase. Now, at this point, the communist player has a lot of stuff in damaged aircraft box. They have some reduced units in available aircraft, 1 MiG and 1 IL-10. I'm thinking the communist doesn't send anything up in the sky at this point. They were hoping at their strongest to chip away at the spearhead of the UN fighter force, and they failed to do that. So it's like, why send them up? Why send them up now? Let's try to repair them. Let's try to get them reorganized and try again later. So we will probably leave that go. With it being winter, there's also the potential for affecting air capability anyway. So it's whatever. So I'm gonna double check the winter rules just to make sure I don't miss anything, and then we'll do the air commitment. But like I said, everything else is covered. One thing I should call out: we rolled clear weather for the weather. For the weather itself, we rolled clear still, even though it is winter. And the Allies were able to repair their aircraft in the damage box, all except for one B-29 bomber, and the communists basically were able to repair one MiG plane. So they got a lucky roll and were able to repair one thing. So that's kind of where things stand now. We'll take a look at the air commitment, and deal with all that stuff, and then we'll get to our weekly turn, and I'll probably try to fit in as much of December 1950 in this video as I can, just so that we're getting through the game quickly. Okay, so here's the UN player aid charts with air commitment. So the communists did not commit any air to anything. They're going to hold things in reserve. They're going to hope for some better rolls next time on all the relevant things for aircraft repair and all of that. They're just going to hold back. The Allies or UN is going for broke because they don't have to worry about any MiGs at the moment. They can put all of their big strategic bombers on missions with no fear. And I decided the airfield striking isn't a big deal right now. Even knocking some airfields out, I mean, I would rather make it so that the communists don't have supply to spend to repair any airfields later anyway. So we're going to try to do well and bomb the crap out of the communist infrastructure. Now, I did look at the winter rules. So generally, the winter rules are like it's a 20% movement cost penalty. Activation range is 8 instead of 10 for HQs and units. The what do you call it? Reserve movement and different things are down to like 4 movement points, that sort of thing. But in winter turns, regardless of the weather, air units have a -2. You subtract 2 from their ability no matter what. And so the reality is, and I had to double check this, so I have to make some adjustments here to the chart. While I have all of these guys set up to do the bombing, the reality is that I will need to roll a 1 or a 2 on a d6 to hit with those. So it's a much more reduced chance of hitting, and it's almost maybe more costly to do this because it's just, at least when I was rolling before, if I roll a 4 or less, that's pretty good odds to hit. Now it's only, maybe 33 or 16% chance to hit, but we still keep that 16% chance of being damaged and going to the damage box. So this is a little bit risky, but why not, right? I've got a ton of stuff going in an interdiction. It is very likely that we're not going to be able to hit much because I will need to roll 1s for these guys, but I've got plenty to try to use. And then I've got a whole bunch of ground support. But again, the same thing would apply here. So if this was not a winter turn, my air support would actually be 18 because I have 6 planes, all of value 3 in there, I believe. Well, if you take 2 off of each plane, that's 12 off the total, which means we actually only have 6. Not as much, right? That's a huge difference, and it's because instead of having a 3 value for each plane, it's effectively a 1 value. So I'm throwing in all of my planes just to have a chance at being involved in the combat. But of course, we might not even have any combat this turn, just depending on where we go and what we do. But I would rather have some. The other thing is I need to make sure my interdiction is up because as of right now, the communist artillery support is up to 8 and the tank support is up to 10. And that has a lot to do with the foreign aid increases and the fact that as the North Koreans, we just did not use tanks or artillery for a while. We just said we're going to hold them back. We're going to hold them back. We're going to reserve them. We're going to save what we got because there's no point in it's hard to get that stuff. So now they actually have a decent number of support that they can use. They've got have repaired some tanks. They've got some things from foreign aid. They got some stuff shipped down to them from the Soviet Union or whatever. Who knows? So we have something resembling an okay tank force and an okay artillery force. Again, I chose to hold them back in some combats because there's just there's no point. Like why we're going to have this combat be so large anyway. Why throw tanks and artillery into a battle that's a lost cause? And I've managed to retain enough that when the Chinese come in, there's actually going to be some punch there they can definitely hit back, and that is again informing my decision to pick terrain where the allies, the UN, will still have a support advantage, and they need to make use of that support advantage. I think as much as they can, or that's my thinking. I don't know. You could say, well, Steve, why not go into those mountains up north and get the defensive bonuses? And that's not a bad idea. But I think when we work out the numbers, like if I'm in the mountains, I'm going to get some bonuses. I'll get a +3, and the communists won't be able to use much support. But the advantage of the Chinese will be their strength in numbers. They're going to have a lot of units that come down, and they're going to be getting a lot of bonuses for support attacks. So it's going to end up being, they're going to get a certain number of bonuses for supported attacks. We're going to get a certain number of support, maybe in defense if we're lucky, but we won't get much support at all, and neither will they. And I believe, as maybe I'm calculating wrong, I think a lot of the time it's just going to work out to be that the die rolls will be too close to one another, that the differences in the bonuses will be narrow enough that the communists will have pretty decent chances of winning, especially on that surprise round, even up in the mountains, where down below, if it's like, okay, they have 8 artillery and it's a 1-for-1, so they get a +8. Well, we have 12 artillery, so we get a band of +4 just from artillery alone. And if you factor in armor and air, and air, is basically functioning just as good as artillery, the bonuses in flat land for the defender or the attacker as the UN player is just better than trying to make use of the more mountainous terrain where we don't get our support, right? Like that's the decision. That's the sort of tactical, math driven decision here, that I'd still rather defend in rough terrain or flat terrain than the mountains as the UN player, because of my preponderance of support, and the types of support that I'm going to rely upon, where I believe the Chinese strength is going to be coming mostly from, again, the sheer numbers, and their ability to operate that way, essentially. That's what I'm thinking. Now, if the communists get more support, and they can, if they manage to get enough support where they can go toe to toe in the flatlands, then maybe that's where we reevaluate that situation. But I think the difference will be, like, even if you have artillery and tank support matched, the air support is what tips it, as well as the shore bombardment support. And that's stuff the communists are just never going to have. They're never going to have enough air ground support to have as anywhere near as much as the UN. And the any chance we have of using the shore bombardment support, we would, and that is pretty dang awesome as well. So I think that's the way it probably plays out. But as we get going through the game, we'll probably discover some things. So anyway, that I'm doing so much commentary. I suspect it's because I haven't done as much recording lately, and I just have a lot to say. So sorry about that, guys. Let's go ahead, and I'll take a pause here to drink some water. But let's do the strategic missions for the air phase. We have our air support. We figured out what that is. Now we do strategic air. There won't be a top cover phase, so we're just going to roll for these guys, and then we'll go to the weekly turn. Okay, so we're just gonna roll these off. These are B-26s. They're a little bit worse. We need 1s for them to succeed. So we'll roll first one. 3 is a miss, so he goes to available. Second one is also a miss. He goes to available. And then we have our B-29s, 3 of them, which have a normal strength of 4, -2 is 2. So a 1 or a 2 is what we need. That is a fail, so they go to the available. Second one. That would be a hit. So infrastructure goes down by 1 for the communists. And he goes to available, and then the last one is also a hit. So infrastructure for the communists goes down a couple. That's going to be important over the long haul. And we fortunately didn't have any rolls of sixes, so we don't have any damaged aircraft. So that's a nice, clean operation for them. Okay, so now we'll look at the weekly turn. Now, I'll just straight up say that the fleet is not going to redeploy. They're going to stay in the Sea of Japan. No amphibious invasions in the winter, but we already did ours anyway, so it doesn't matter. No sea evacuation. So now we're going to look at reinforcements. I'm actually not sure what the reinforcement looks like for this turn. Let's see, we are talking about November 1950. So just so you guys can see it, November 1950. 7th Fleet Carriers box, we're going to get another carrier group unit, which I already added that. That's for the monthly turn, my bad. I already did add that, but here, weeks 1 through 4, the UN is going to get another Republic of Korea HQ. We're going to get some replacement points, and then the communist player is going to get 1 North Korean unit. So I will get those guys set up. Again, we don't have any North Korean replacements, and I still don't believe I can use Chinese replacements for those guys. So they've got units, but gosh, they're brittle because they have no reserves to call losses for, call upon for losses. So that's going to be a problem for them. I'll get these reinforcements on the board, and then we'll take care of the UN refresh stuff, and we'll see what the communists can do with their activity this turn. Probably not a whole lot. Okay, so here we are. I'm gonna try to avoid the glare as best I can. Here we are after the communist strat move. I don't think I'm even going to have them do any activations. I mean, I really don't see what they can do other than to attempt to fight in a couple of places, and they're probably just going to get their butt kicked and they're going to get themselves destroyed. So if the idea here is for the North Koreans to just hold what they can and hope not to be destroyed so they can have units on the field later when the communists come in just to help with the number of forces, I think this is, there's not much for them to do, honestly, even with the support they have. The support they do have for the moment will be outmatched, and we don't have enough in terms of forces. Like, if we send this guy here forward, well, he's just going to get surrounded and eliminated. He won't even get the support of the tank and artillery because he's just going to get surrounded. And I do wonder, as I play through, like, is one issue that because of the counter density being so low, is it actually easier or even too easy to surround a unit and force it to be out of communication for artillery and tank support, right? Like, it's just that easy, right? I mean, if you don't have enough units, like right now the UN has tons of units, but for some of the game on either side, it's very easy to be surrounded. Well, and if you're surrounded, you can't get support, right? And there's just, because you have low counter density, it's not like you have extra counters to be sitting, here and here, that just make it a little bit harder for each individual unit to be surrounded by Zocs. Now, ultimately, maybe other games are just like this anyway. It's just maybe it's just part of the conflict here that we have to deal with. But I do look at the situation for the North Koreans and just know that, hey, they don't have much. Because they don't have much, it's easier to surround each individual unit, and they get torn apart. And maybe that's just the way it is, right? I don't know. Well, maybe this is kind of what is supposed to be happening, that the North Koreans are just getting their butts kicked up the peninsula as the Chinese enter the game. I think they were already, like, now this turn would have been, or maybe last turn is when the Chinese would have started crossing the border historically. So I forget the exact date that was occurring. So we're it's a little bit different right now. And I will say it is hard to divorce my mind at the moment, because I know as the UN player that I'm probably not going to try to push very hard north, which means as the communist player, I can try to separate my mind and just say, well, here's what they would do objectively in a vacuum, not knowing what the UN player is planning. It is still hard for me to do that. So it's like, oh, well, maybe the communists would be pulling back even harder than they already are. And in some places, I've pulled back as far as I feel comfortable. I don't want to move this guy. That makes it too easy for the UN forces to get too close to, being up here on the border. This guy is protecting this guy's flank, so he kind of needs to be there. Up here, it's kind of bad news bears, but I think the only thing, maybe what I would do instead is pull this guy back to here, just so there's not an open freeway to use. But everywhere else, it's like you're trying to hold certain junction points along the way. Um, but we don't. I don't feel the need to pull them back all the way. It's just going to depend on what the UN decides to do. And again, as the UN player, I'm thinking, well, I don't think we get much value heading too far into the mountains. And that our greatest strength is on the coasts and in flatland where our air superiority will help us. Because you have, again, to repeat what I said earlier, you have to remember that air power is going to equate to artillery power in terms of use. So if you have comparable air power to your artillery levels and your opponent has the same artillery levels but not as many, it doesn't have air, you're still basically a 2-to-1 advantage in terms of modifiers for that. So I think that's kind of like the way the math works out, that it's just a really tough sell for the UN right now to go too far into the mountains unless we were ahead of schedule and could make it all the way to the border and sort of create really hard reinforcement phases for the communists. Again, I keep thinking back to when I halted south of the border. I maybe really should not have done that, and I should have pushed really hard and gotten all the way up here. I would need every turn to do it and hope that the Chinese don't intervene, but push super hard to be up against each of these reinforcement supply source hexes to just make it really hard for the communists to get out of there. Um, that would have been probably our best, maybe that would have been our best option. And we would have had plenty of time to work with in terms of getting victory points for objectives that we've captured. The other thing, though, is that like the communists still get surprised. So even if we were up against the border along here, well, on the surprise round, all the enemy units uh, become spent, which means that they're going to be defending worse. So like how does that shake out, right? You're going to get the communists get a bunch of deliberate attack bonuses to attack into South Korea probably. And you're going to have a bunch of spent U.S. units that can't operate as well, and they're going to get, they'll be at a further disadvantage of getting trounced. But your positioning, being so far north, is maybe better over time. It's just that's a very long front. If you look from like here all the way across each border, each border hex, that's just a lot of ground to cover. So it's really hard to say. Like, and I can kind of understand the design thought process here, right? Like, how far up to the Chinese border do you really want to go, and does that help you at all? And is it of that much value to do that, or are you better off, being a little more cautious? Because as a player, the Chinese are going to intervene. The UN forces at the time didn't necessarily know for sure that would happen, or even at times doubtful that the Chinese would intervene. So I don't know, kind of interesting interplay there. But we're done with the communist stuff. I'm gonna go do the UN activations, and that'll do it for this turn. And then we'll probably try to get some of December 1950 done in this video. Okay, real quick, I just want to show after the UN strategic move, we are getting into a little bit of a log jam just because there's only so many places to go. Um, you can see, I mean, we've certainly got enough guys that we could keep heading north and do stuff, but I'm just not sure. I have had to move some of the HQs north of the border, which makes it much more complicated to keep things in supply. And in fact, because it's winter and the UN is in North Korea, and these would be where the HQs we would be paying a refresh are, it cost 4 in the winter instead of 2 to refresh an HQ, a UN faction HQ in North Korea. 4. Now, because of other supply expenditure and stuff from before, uh, the UN player only has 9 supply, which means we can basically refresh 2 HQs. Um, but it doesn't really matter because once we're done here, we're going to get a supply refresh anyway. So it doesn't really matter how many HQs I activate. And I really don't need to refresh them at the end of their activation. In fact, I can use them to move if I really want to, because we're going to reach the end of the month already. So ordinarily, and this is sort of a preview for the next turn, where we're going to have to deal with winter across multiple turns. If it's going to cost me 4, and I may only have 12 or less supply in any given turn, um, I'm only going to be able to activate and refresh, 2 HQ basically, maybe 3 if we're fortunate. So I can't be too spendy and just like get real crazy. Just depending on how many supply points we actually have and how much more expensive it is to operate in North Korea, I will have to pick carefully which HQs I activate. It will be likely um, that I activate HQs to activate the cadre so that we get the most bang for our buck there and activate a lot of units to do all the many things that we're interested in trying to do. Um, but I can certainly see, because the other thing we have to be careful of is our activation range is only 8 movement points. So everything is just a lot harder to do, and we're not going to go as far in each individual activation because even our movement is reduced to, I think it's 4 movement points instead of 5. So we still can't go very far. We're just limited in that way, and because of that, trying to head up into the mountains is definitely a problem, especially where there are not roads. So we have to kind of pick where we're going to make our stand, and I suspect that I used my tweezers here to demark how far north I could strategically move as the UN player. I mean, we're probably not going to go much past this line anyway, right? I might come over here, try to blow up, a couple of these units and get them off the board, but I don't know how valuable it is for me to put myself in a precarious position where those units are going to be hurt badly by Chinese surprise, which is going to come. It's either going to come, this next month, or it's going to happen in January. And I think, you know, because that surprise is going to negate the UN forces for an entire month, it kind of doesn't matter whether it happens in December or January at this point for the communists, or the UN for that matter. It's going to be the same damage either way, but we're going to have multiple turns of the communists being able to operate effectively. And where would you rather operate effectively, right? So at the very least, what we probably want to do is create a situation where, because the UN player will not have Zox on the surprise round, that we at least create a solid line so that even if we're not projecting Zox, you can't navigate around the UN units. You have to fight through the line they've created. So we'll probably attempt to do something like that and be basically right above this bottleneck and have eliminated maybe a couple of these units, but try to have created a line that we can defend decently enough to await the Chinese intervention. So I'm going to take care of their activation, and then I will jump right into I'll between now and the next cut, I will have completed the UN actions. I might show for a quick minute the results of that, and then we'll get through the monthly turn stuff for December 1950. Okay, so here we are after the end of the UN activations and really the end of the turn, because I've done the objective marker phase as well. So we eliminated 2 communist units. We pushed back some other ones, and the way it kind of worked out, I was able to destroy the 2 that or that I did, because I surrounded them, which meant that they couldn't retreat. So the only real way to take losses, which were always pretty much the maximum combat loss, was to eliminate the unit. The others were able to, because they were guards units both, Communist Guards units could give up 2 victory points and then retreat 2 hexes and get a snafu marker and become disrupted. And that's what they did. So they didn't have Zocs they had to worry about, so they retreated. They retreated. We're getting awfully close to the Chinese border here, but I'm careful not to get too close. But that has given now 4 more victory points to the UN player. So the UN player is now sitting at 8 victory points, which kind of puts them in like not too terribly distant a mark from automatic victory in many ways. So I decided with the UN objective option to flip units adjacent, or flip objectives that were adjacent, and all the ones that I've been plugging into Seoul were all like 1 value markers, funnily enough. But the total objective values for the UN player that they can pick up and claim, as long as they get the turns to do it, are in total, let's see, 3, 6, 9, 9 plus 4 more. Okay. So 13 that are on the board to pick up. So 13 plus yeah, 13. 13 plus 8 is 21, which is enough for automatic victory. Okay. So what does that mean for the long-term situation here? Well, it means that if the UN player did nothing else and managed to avoid the communists getting any victory points, if they can hold out for 1, 2, 3, 7 turns, they will win the game automatically. And if I look, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We could see that happen by August of 1951. So what needs to happen from the communist perspective to stop that from happening? Well, I think the communists need to basically avoid losing any more victory points that way, easily losing victory points to unit losses or combat losses, because you're just going to make that even easier. And when the Chinese come in, the Chinese are going to have to bust their butt and capture objectives. Absolutely. That will need to happen. Now, the way it's kind of working out is that now that the UN controls Pyongyang, that is where the communist player is placing objective markers. They are incentivized to do that because that is the easiest place to put them right now. It's closer than Seoul, and if the communists have enough momentum with China, they should be able to retake Pyongyang. So all this time spent with the UN controlling Pyongyang, we're going to drop objective markers there and hope to claim them down the road. If we're good enough and the communists can push into Seoul, then they'll be able to pick off the objective markers that they had stashed in Seoul way, way, way back earlier in the game. And the only thing that would stop that is if the UN player took the time to spend their objective action removing those markers and putting a unit there. They need a unit there to do it, but they could do it. So there's kind of this interesting dynamic of like, again, it's like you only get one action per turn related to objectives. You're placing them, you're revealing them, you're claiming them. I think the UN player is incentivized right now to claim all these victory points as much as they can. Now that they've revealed all of them, they know how many are on the board. They know what they can get to do their damnedest to pick them up. And the only way the communists can really stop that from happening is winning their own objective point, getting their own objective markers, getting their own victory points to bring the UN player out of automatic victory threshold, or push so far down into near Seoul that the UN player now can't claim those victory points. Once you have a unit within 3 hexes of that objective marker, then they can't just pick them up for free. So that does put some tension into the game right now, where we can see, hey, there's a victory condition that is in sight that could happen. And at the very least, the game is very weighted in the UN favor in terms of where the victory points lie. The one problem for the UN player is that the victory points are high enough that it is going to dramatically impact foreign aid for the communist player. The communist is going to get a lot of aid, um, and you're trying to figure out like, well, what would have made this any better? And it's almost like you just have to take the penalty with foreign aid because you'd rather have the victory points. You what you kind of want to do is sit at a low number of victory points so that your opponent doesn't get very much foreign aid, and then in a burst of several turns, like what we're looking at here, like 7 or less turns of huge victory point gains thanks to the objective markers, all faster than your opponent can really deal with, is ideal. If you were, for instance, set up to have the objective advantage, if we need 7 turns, right? 7 turns to get the victory points. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But how many monthly turns is that? That's 5 monthly turns. That's 5 monthly turns of foreign aid going to the communist player. It's probably better to be getting that where you have more turns in less months. So like the tail end of the game, you might have 7 turns go by and only have 2 or 3 monthly turns, which might be better. But at this point, the UN player is probably thinking like, what? I've got it, pedal to the metal. Let's bank those victory points. Whatever communist support comes in, hope that the UN has enough support to keep it. And at that point, it might not even matter where the front line is. We want to keep the front line away from Seoul, and we want to keep it away from Pyongyang if we can. So there is an incentive for like territorial control because of that. Even without my proposed fixes, quote unquote fixes to the objective marker system, there is still an incentive to say like, I don't want the communists to make it close to Pyongyang. That would be a problem that might slow down our victory point accrual. We'll have to see. And I think because you can only do one objective action, it's like, okay, the UN player is thinking every turn for the next 7 turns, I'm just going to pick up victory points. That's what I want to do. I just want to pick up these victory points as quickly as I can, as efficiently as I can, and maybe hit automatic victory before the communists can make it further down south. Now, what does that really represent in game terms to history? Like, I don't know. Somehow it could be a representation of some political diplomatic talks of like, we've held the territory for this long, and we did XYZ, whatever. We played this little mini game of objective markers in such a way that the diplomatic resolution to the war is more in favor of the Western powers, the UN, than was historical, because we held, I don't know, the territory long enough in such a way that it just works out that way mathematically. I don't know. But you can see we have put the hurt on the communists. They have 4 units on the board right now, and some HQs that have been pushed back. You can see the front line is kind of in some level of existence right here, and we're probably not going to push very hard beyond this because it just doesn't help us very much to do so right now. Not in my opinion, right? I think like we've taken enough that we think we can bring the war to a satisfactory conclusion, I guess is one way to look at it. So, okay, that's it for this turn. I'm going to go ahead and do the monthly turn for December, and we'll see how much we can take care of there. Okay, so as I look at the December monthly turn, nothing too crazy in terms of stuff going on. It is winter, but the weather is still technically clear. The foreign aid definitely went to the communists. The Chinese did not intervene, which means the Chinese will intervene at the beginning of January at the latest possible time in this game. So we just missed the die roll every time with the modifiers that would affect the game position. But the communists did get a healthy amount of aid with that, so they are getting more and more artillery and tank support replenishment, which I think there's a whole conversation about the ahistorical nature of tank support coming in like this, but I won't focus too much on that. If you figure it as foreign aid that you don't have to ask for and give the opponent victory points, then maybe you don't get this ahistorical armor support. And the Chinese are getting more and more replacements, which will mean when the Chinese enter, they can take hits pretty good. They'll be able to take hits for a while. So the Chinese intervention is bubbling still, but not present. Um, when it comes to the air segment, the communists were not able to repair any of their aircraft. The UN was able to repair their last plane. We actually had a withdrawal happen where one of the planes that we had um, originally allocated for ground support was withdrawn. That's the fifth carrier group. We actually also have the bombardment levels decrease. So, the reinforcement schedule is not all about new stuff. You actually can lose some stuff on that schedule, and the UN player did lose some stuff, unfortunately for them. So here we are for the air commitment. Now the communists have again elected to not deploy anything at all. They just are not even going to bother. They are doing this because they don't really expect. Um, we just really do not expect that there will be a way to contest the UN player right now. We need to wait for Chinese intervention, basically. And we need to get one of our MiGs back out of the damaged box. Once we have two MiGs, we can at least entertain the idea of having a battle in MiG Alley. But, it's tricky. The other thing I'll point out is that because the communists took foreign aid, which they think they'll need later, they give yet another victory point to the UN player, which puts them effectively, potentially one turn closer to victory. So there's going to reach a point where the communist is probably not going to ask for any more foreign aid because to do so would just make it too easy for the UN player to win. So I guess, but again, you look at that objective marker mini game. I mean, sure, when it comes to foreign aid, we're reaching a point where, sure, foreign aid can be helpful, but now we're just going to make it too easy for the UN player to play for that time and claim their objective markers that they've banked into Seoul. I do suspect if my proposed changes were to be used and you can't just put objective markers south of the border so easily, south of your front line or north of your front line, depending on who you are, so easily, that would change the game flow right now. But the fact that I'm able to do this has its own impact on the game, where it matters less now on where we're placing objectives along a changing front, and instead just matters, what I'm plugging into my gamey VP bank. So I don't know. There you go. We're gonna do our airstrike. So again, there's not going to be a top cover phase. So as soon as we're done doing the air commitment and strategic air mission stuff, we can figure out the factors here. Probably the other thing I should point out is that our air support is actually down to 5 because we had one of the planes go home that we would have otherwise put into ground support. And because the winter, again, keep in mind, during winter you subtract 2 from the value over here of your planes. So they're not as effective. So each plane going to do ground support is only providing 1 support level. The more I mess around with this and I try to set planes up to decide what to do, the more annoyed I am at the aircraft capability chart. The fact that I have to look at the counter at the small black on blue text of the UN unit to figure out what model it is, or I get good at looking at the picture and recognizing it for what it is. Then I have to look at the chart. Then I have to look at the number. And I'm just so used to the convenience of World in Flames where you have the numbers on the counter and you just know, where the number is, that is what it is, right? Most of these planes are only going to have, 1 to 2 numbers that really matter. It might have been easier just to put on the counters, honestly, because I'm now looking in 2 places rather than 1 place to derive what I'm going to do in a game sense. So I don't know. But okay, we're going to have 4 planes, all B-29s, do infrastructure bombing. So we'll go ahead and roll. For that, we need a 3 or less, or I'm sorry, a 2 or less on these to hit. So first Oof, goes into the damaged box, so he's done. The second, ouch, same thing happens. That's a bummer. Okay, and doing again. Oh my gosh, I just rolled 3 6s in a row on camera. I don't know what to say about that, guys. Okay, it wasn't 4 in a row, but this guy misses, so he goes to available. Well, no infrastructure strikes, for what it matters. I'll throw out there that you kind of need to keep up the infrastructure bombing if your opponent is getting foreign aid, because the foreign aid tends to increase infrastructure. So while you might be thinking, hey, you've hit their infrastructure quite a bit there, Steve, it's been somewhat negated by the foreign aid. And so the communist player still has enough infrastructure and they have cheaper costs in North Korea that we're not hurting them as badly as you might think we would be. Next, we're going to have these guys do airstrikes on airfields. We need to roll a 1 for this. And we got one. Okay, so 1 was successful. I'll just remember that before I walk over there and damage a airfield. And we'll do another, and that one unfortunately misses. So there you go. Then the rest of these allocations are done. Gonna be the interdiction is really just there because I haven't needed much air support lately, and I just want to make sure that if the communists try to do something, we can negate them for the month. But we need a roll so low that most of these I probably won't end up even using. In fact, last turn I really didn't use these much, and I didn't even roll to stay on station because I didn't use them, so they just kind of sat there as a threat more than anything. But okay, that is it for the monthly turn for December, and we can get into the weekly turns. We have 2 weekly turns this month. So one turn that is weeks 1 and 2 together, and then a second turn that is weeks 3 and 4. We're going to keep the fleet where it is. There's no amphibious invasion, no sea evacuation, and so now we just have reinforcements. During this, there looks like there will be no reinforcements for weeks 3 and 4, and the only reinforcements we have is that the UN will add 2 replacement points to the UN. Or yeah, the UN will get 2 replacement points, so they have quite a bit. And then the Chinese will get 3. Not that they're really using them at the moment, but they have 14 replacements. But the Chinese are going to be in good shape when they come into the game next month. The North Koreans can't rebuild units. They have a huge amount in their replacement pile that they can do nothing with at the moment. So I'm not sure. I'm not even sure there's going to be the possibility for any North Korean replacements. Like, I don't think they're on the schedule at all to come in. So I think all these guys are gone, but like they're gone forever, seemingly at this point. I might have to go look to see, is there any other way for the North Koreans to use Chinese replacements? But I do not believe that to be the case. So the reinforcement phase, there's really nothing else to do. And we'll get over to the, I'll do the UN refresh phase, and then we'll do the communist activation, and I'll show if anything really matters there. Okay, so I forgot to mention something I did with the monthly turn. The UN actually spent out its supply for the whole month restoring HQs because it is a bit more expensive, but they also placed some prepared position markers under a number of UN units as part of our sort of defensive line here. I did it, I spent 6 supply creating 6 prepared position markers. Now, in doing so, I realize I've sort of gone back on my own word saying, oh, I'll defend down here where all my support can help. Because the prepared positions make it so that, like, even your own tank support can't be used, I think. And I'm sort of doing this more because I can. So if I'm really going to say, like, okay, here's my defensive line, well, then I'm going to prepare a defensive line, and we'll see how it shakes out. What I want to see is will it actually work better for the communists to be attacking where there's not much artillery or tank or air support allowed, period, or not, right? Because the strength of the communists are probably going to come from combined attacks. because they're going to have a lot of guys basically coming down. And so that's going to be the experiment. We'll have to see how well it plays out. But I am going to spend some time preparing positions in such a way that we don't overstretch ourselves trying to fight through all of these mountains and areas where it's hard to move and navigate, but instead create our own defensive terrain along a line that we can more easily defend with the number of guys that we actually have at our disposal. So a well-prepared defense, right? We're in the meeting room, or we're talking to the president saying, "Hey, we've seized the major cities of the country. We have not approached the border of China, but we are creating a defensive perimeter, and we're going to hope for the best and hope that the diplomats of the time can determine a peace that will work in favor of the United Nations, the Western powers." We'll see how that goes. Um, but there's a consequence of me doing that. So the UN, or I'm sorry, the communist activation, I've already done. They didn't do anything. They didn't move. The best they can do right now is just hold their positions. That's really it. Hold their positions, be a nuisance, hope the Chinese communists can come in. When it comes to the UN player, whatever action they take, they can certainly activate, HQs to do stuff, but they don't want to do that yet, because what they would rather do is have that happen. Um, well, I don't know. The trick is, I'd rather pay to replenish HQs at the end of a turn. And so, does it make any sense for us to move any more units? Right? I think that's the real thing. So if we're on to the UN activation, what I might do, if I count 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, or maybe the other way. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Okay, we can activate all these Korean units. Say, oh, I'll activate these guys, and their purpose is just going to be to fill in a line, let's say. That's all we would really need to do, and maybe we end up moving this HQ up like so. That's maybe all they would do, and then they'll wait for the second turn to do something. Maybe. I guess it doesn't really matter. I mean, if we really did just spend out our HQs, it would just mean we would have no actions. We would have very limited actions the next turn to do anything. And I'm cautious of that because we know that the communists are going to come in. So, like, how far forward do you really want to be right now? And I'm not so sure I have a good answer for that. I think we want to probably screen over here with some more stuff, so it might be worth activating units for that reason alone. So maybe what we do is we activate this HQ, and we have this guy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bonus movement would be 6, 7, 8. Oops. And likewise move this guy like so. And maybe that's what we do. Just trying to create a somewhat contiguous line where, we're not exposing our units too much. We have some line to hold along the way here. Maybe that's the best they do. But then if the UN is done, right, and they don't have any supply to spend to restore units, which kind of means all these guys over here can no longer activate, right? That's really the key thing I'm worried about. It's like, do we attack over here, and would we have enough activation range to do that? And we probably would not, right? So if we were going to try to do something over here, we'd have to do it now. So if we activated 1, 2 units, with this HQ, we could do 2 more, And maybe we would be activating this cadre, and he's going to move 1.5, so he could do a, well, really, it's going to be this guy doing a deliberate attack. And the real question would we be able to get a unit around to the other side? So it would be 1.5, 3, and it would cost too much to move into here, but this guy could go, oh yeah, he would have a problem. But this is what we could do, I guess. Yeah, boy, we want to get Zox around this guy, but I'm not sure we have the movement to do it. What we could do is sacrifice the deliberate attack and go 1, 2, 3, and have this guy go 1, 2, and then this becomes a prepared attack. It's a really bad prepared attack around this guy to eliminate him. But I pulled an awful chit for a prepared attack. But maybe that's what we need to do. Yeah, maybe that's what we do. Well, all right. If we were to adjudicate that, here's the thing. This guy's out of supply. He's in the terrain that gives him a +1, but he's got an incompetent leader. He's disrupted. The whole gamut, and it's like, no matter what you roll, he's going to get eliminated, I think. So if it's a d6 -1, but you use, say, artillery, we would end up still having +9s would be +8. Armor would be another +5, so we're off in like the +13. And this guy would have no bonuses at all, really. And yeah, I mean, he's totally annihilated. Like, it almost doesn't matter what I roll, but this guy's annihilated. So there goes a guards unit who was disrupted and had an incompetent leader. He's just toast. But I guess the bad side for the communists is like, well, we're in a precarious position for defense. We've kind of opened a gap here that the Chinese communists could potentially exploit. Potentially, but I think what they'll probably be able to do is strat move one of their HQs over here and activate these guys again, and they might pull back into it to a better defensive perimeter. In fact, that's probably what's going to happen next turn. But okay, let's say we were done with that turn. Well, we would have the communists probably put another objective marker in Pyongyang. Now they could probably put some over here. Let's look at that. Like, where would it be maybe better to put one? Maybe we put one. Well, it has to be within 3 hexes of a unit. And that's a problem. So I guess we have to put the objective marker in Pyongyang. The UN player is going to peel off a victory point marker, and get 3 victory points. That's going to put them at 12 victory points for their objectives. And now we would go into weeks 3 and 4. We would not move the fleet. We would not do any evacuations or whatever else. The reinforcements really do not apply. The UN refresh phase would occur. So we get a little pick-me-up with these guys. And I guess these guys too. And then Communist Strategic Movement. They have nothing to do. Nothing to do but hold on. So the communist activation phase, I mean, truly, I think the only thing they would probably do is make it so that they activate this HQ to make this guy not disrupted anymore. But he still has no ammo, so it's kind of a moot point. And if they tried to replace that with a supply point, wrong die, they're able to do it. So the communists can spend a supply and refresh that HQ, but there's nothing else to really do for them. Then if we let it go to the UN side for weeks 3 and 4 of December 1950, we would see this guy probably do, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5, 8. So yeah, he would be fine here. We would strat move that HQ to a more central position along the line for the moment. Still enough to 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. That's actually the best place for this guy right now. And if we activated him, we activate these units, that cadre and its subsequent buddies, you could probably then just pull back, maybe pull back like this. That's what you would probably end up doing. Maybe you activate these guys and you create a little bit better of a line there. And I suppose these guys would just be spent like so. Maybe you try something more like this. And with your other two, 1.5, could probably get out here. Maybe you leave that guy there. So maybe do something like that. Like that's maybe as good as it gets with your activations, and everything else is just as well as you can hold the line. And then that's it. That's it for this turn, effectively. And so if we were to look at another victory point situation, well, what would you do? You'd say, we're going to put an objective marker in Pyongyang, and the UN player is going to pick off probably what makes the most sense. They would probably pick off a marker that is closest to the enemy front, since that would be easier for the communists to get closer to. So they're going to pick off one of their 1 BP markers in Seoul, and that gives them another victory point. They're up to 13, so they're doing quite well from that perspective. And I think that's the end of that. So we would have now, we would just be going into January 1951, and this is where Chinese intervention would occur. And I think this is a great place to stop the video. We did, what, a handful of turns here? I think. A couple of turns, 3 turns, all going very quickly because there's not much for the communists to do. The UN player is trying to pick a strategically sound path of, preparing for the worst. Slightly different than the historical actions, but part of wargaming, I guess, is exploring some of those what ifs, and we're sort of doing that. And this will be the line that, a little bit of an uneven line, but there you go. We want to stay close to the roads for supply purposes. That will be the line that the Chinese communists are going to try to smash their way through and fight their way back down to Seoul. and pick up their own victory markers, I guess, right? So that's where we're going to see things play out. Next video, the Chinese will enter, and we will be in a new phase of the war, the later half, the true later half of the game, where there's going to be still potentially a lot more stuff to happen, a lot more fun to come. So see you in the next one, guys. Hope you enjoy the video. And take care, keep gaming. See you next time.